What if the final chapter of human history was written long before the first? What if the rise of kingdoms, the fall of empires, and every fragment of our collective memory were only shadows cast by a far older sovereignty, one ruled not by men, but by a king whose reign stretched across epochs we no longer remember? Imagine that somewhere beneath deserts, beneath ruins, beneath the polite silence of academia, lies the imprint of a monarch who walked the earth 13,000 years ago. A ruler whose name was erased, whose symbols were buried, and whose departure marked the end of an age humanity was never meant to recall. For centuries, we've told ourselves that civilization began in Sumer, that writing emerged in Mesopotamia. That kingship was a human invention. But the deeper you look into forbidden texts, anomalous ruins, impossible astronomical alignments, the more one presence seems to stand behind it all. A presence the ancient world once feared, worshipped, and eventually mourned: the Last Anunnaki King. His story was not lost by accident. It was suppressed, scattered, fragmented into myths so diluted they became children's tales. Yet the fragments remain, and when they are placed side by side, a terrifying truth begins to surface, one that rewrites everything we think we know about our species. Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself, and let's dive in. They say history begins when humans first learn to write, but the deeper you move into the cracks of ancient memory, the clearer it becomes that writing was never humanity's invention. It was an inheritance. Something handed down by beings who walked these lands before floods reshaped the coastlines, before deserts swallowed their monuments, before their presence was recast into myth. When scholars speak of the dawn of civilization, they often talk as though the world before 5,000 years ago was empty. Yet tablet after tablet, ruin after ruin, whisper a different story, one in which humanity rose under the watch of a king who was not human, who ruled not for decades but millennia. A king whose very departure tore open a wound that reshaped the world. The Last Anunnaki King. To understand what his final years looked like, you must step away from the comforting glow of the present world and into a time when the boundaries between mortals and gods had not yet hardened. When human settlements were still new, fragile, unsure of their place, and when the sky was not a cold, empty blanket of stars, but a living map filled with omens. The earliest Sumerian texts do not speak of invention. They speak of restoration, of rebuilding what was lost. They hint at cities that existed before the flood, at knowledge preserved in secret vaults, at a lineage of rulers who descended from the heavens to shape the first order of the world. And threading through these accounts is a singular figure whose reign overlaps eras, whose name appears in broken glyphs, but whose identity remains deliberately obscured beneath layers of metaphors and fragmented lore. Imagine a landscape before the Younger Dryas ended, before sea levels surged, before the world rearranged itself. Massive stone platforms, now underwater, once served as markers of power. Great ziggurat-like structures rose from plains that no longer exist. And at the center of these early hubs stood the palace temple of the Last Anunnaki King. More than a structure of stone, It was a place of convergence. Scholars often dismiss the idea that advanced engineering could have existed before the known civilizations, yet megalithic ruins from Turkey to Peru echo one another in their precision and astronomical alignment. It is as if they were all built following a pattern established by someone who understood Earth's cycles far better than the people who inherited them. Someone who ruled long enough to watch the planet shift through ages. The king's reign, according to hidden Mesopotamian chronologies, spanned over thousands of years, not because he was immortal, in the way myths exaggerate, but because his species was engineered with lifespans that dwarf ours. The Anunnaki were said to age slowly, their bodies resistant to decay, their neural structures capable of storing centuries of memory. To humans, who measured time by harvests and the passing of generations, their presence must have felt eternal. And this particular ruler, this final sovereign, was known for walking among his subjects not as a distant god, but as an architect of their cities, an overseer of their irrigation systems, a keeper of the old stellar knowledge, the kind of presence that becomes the backbone of an entire world. Yet even a king with an alien longevity cannot escape the cycles of power. Across ancient fragments found in hidden archives, a consistent theme emerges: tension between factions of the Anunnaki themselves, between those who believed humanity should rise and those who believed humanity should serve, between those who favored integration and those who demanded isolation. The last Anunnaki king stood in the center of these conflicts, trying to hold together a world on the edge of collapse. Many of the disasters later reimagined as divine punishments, storms, earthquakes, sudden climate events, were not natural catastrophes, but the consequences of a political war among beings with technology beyond our comprehension. His palace, said to be built atop a foundation of stone that hummed when touched, served not merely as a residence, but as a command center. During excavations in modern-day Iraq, researchers encountered a strange layer beneath ancient ruins, vitrified stone fused by heat far beyond what ancient fires could produce. This layer that should not exist is often ignored in mainstream reports, quietly filed away as anomalous. But in forbidden interpretations of the past, it is described as the remnants of the energy systems used by the Anunnaki. Systems that powered not machines as we imagine them, but colossal structures designed to stabilize or manipulate environmental conditions. And at the heart of those systems was the last king, whose duty was to maintain balance between Earth's natural cycles and the technological imprint of his people. For thousands of years, that balance held. Humanity flourished under guidance, learning agriculture, astronomy, metallurgy, not through spontaneous genius, but through careful instruction. Myths about gods teaching humans how to plant, how to forge, how to count the sky are not flights of fancy. They are memories of a time when knowledge flowed from a higher lineage. But such stability, such harmony, is always temporary. And in these earliest memories lies the beginning of the king's downfall, though not through rebellion or betrayal, but through inevitability. As Earth entered a violent period of climatic fluctuation, global temperatures shifted abruptly. Ice sheets collapsed. Sea levels rose faster than any human society could adapt to. And while humans felt the brunt of these shifts, the Anunnaki suffered in ways deeper, more destabilizing. Their technology, calibrated for a stable planetary environment, became unpredictable, Their factions grew desperate. Some demanded evacuation. Others insisted on staying until the last human settlement was secure. The last king belonged to the latter group, a choice that would define his fate. Ancient tablets hint at secret councils where voices shouted in languages we no longer speak, where timelines, predictions, and catastrophic models were laid out before the king. He saw futures in which humanity survived but forgot, futures in which humanity remembered but perished. And he understood that his departure, or his death, would shape which path came to pass. His final decision was not born from divinity or arrogance, but from a strange compassion. He believed humanity was capable of rising without their presence, that their shadows needed to be removed for true independence to begin. But he also knew his people would not leave peacefully. Thus began the slow unraveling of the first great order. Across the globe, structures once humming with energy were shut down. Towers that tracked the heavens went dark. The massive stone circuits carved into mountainsides lost their function. To humans, it must have looked like the gods were abandoning them. Rivers shifted. Sky patterns changed. Animals migrated in strange formations, and the king, once omnipresent, retreated deeper into his stronghold, not out of fear, but to prepare for what would come next. His final council is one of the most haunting, forgotten events in human prehistory. According to scattered cuneiform fragments, the meeting lasted 7 days. 7 days in which every remaining Anunnaki leader gathered to decide the fate of their species on Earth. Tensions boiled. Some demanded dominion, others argued for destruction. A few, loyal to the king, pleaded for preservation. And at the center of them all, the last king remained silent, weighing a decision heavier than any throne. When he finally spoke, his decree shocked even his loyalists. The Anunnaki would leave, but he would stay behind. Why would a king with millennia of life remaining choose to remain on a planet collapsing into chaos? The answer lies in fragments of stories passed down through secret priesthoods, stories that suggest a prophecy, a cycle, a cosmic rhythm in which the presence of an Anunnaki king anchored Earth's stability. Without him, storms would worsen, seismic activity would spike, and humanity's fragile settlements would crumble. He became not just a ruler, but a stabilizer, a guardian against a world spiraling out of balance. And so the Exodus began. Their crafts, later reimagined as chariots of fire or ascending stars, left the night sky one by one. Humans watched, terrified and awestruck, as their gods vanished. Only the king remained, and with him a small circle of attendants who refused to leave his side. This departure marked the beginning of what would later be mythologized as the Age of Forgetting, a time when knowledge dimmed, when stories blurred into legend, when the memory of the king became encoded in symbols and metaphors, a time when the world felt emptier, heavier, more uncertain. But the king's final years were not spent in silence. He traveled from settlement to settlement, teaching humans how to survive without divine oversight. He showed them how to track the stars even when the sky seemed unfamiliar, how to plant crops in shifting climates, how to read patterns in water and wind. His presence became almost ghost-like, a wandering guardian preparing humanity for an age that would one day call itself civilization, unaware that it was merely rebuilding the ruins of something far older. And then, one day, he vanished. No records describe his death. No tomb has ever been found. No monument stands where he last laid his head. Instead, legends across continents speak of a tall figure who descended into a hidden chamber, a mountain cavern, an underground vault, promising to return when the world reached its next turning point. Some said he entered a deep sleep. Others believed he traveled beneath the earth. A few whispered that his spirit fused with the planet itself, becoming a silent observer of humanity's rise and fall. What remains undeniable is this. After his disappearance, a strange silence settled over the world. Knowledge receded like a tide. Structures once aligned perfectly with celestial markers fell into disrepair. Rituals preserved fragments of his teachings but lost their meaning. And humanity, now unanchored, began its long climb into history, believing it was the beginning, never realizing it was a continuation. The last Anunnaki king was not a myth. He was a memory deliberately obscured, erased by the very descendants of the people he saved. His reign was the last bridge between the age of gods and the age of men. And somewhere, buried in ruins or starlight or the collective unconscious of our species, his presence still echoes, waiting for the moment when the forgotten past returns to confront the fragile present. If the last Anunnaki king truly vanished into the silence of prehistory, then the only way to understand what followed is to search for the echoes he left behind. Echoes scattered not across one region, but across the entire planet. These echoes are not written in a single language or carved by a single people. They appear in symbols that should not match, yet somehow do, in myths separated by oceans that should never have crossed paths, in architectural patterns too similar to be coincidence. When you trace these strands carefully enough, they begin to converge on a phenomenon that scholars quietly acknowledge, even if they cannot explain it: the sudden global shift that occurred after the king's disappearance. A shift so abrupt, so synchronized, that it suggests a deliberate transition, almost as if humanity were nudged toward a new path. Consider what it means for dozens of early cultures to simultaneously begin developing agriculture, architecture, mathematics, and astronomy within a remarkably narrow window of time. Mainstream history calls this the Neolithic Revolution, as though humans, after hundreds of thousands of years of simple living, spontaneously woke up one morning and decided to invent everything. But buried beneath that convenient explanation lies an uncomfortable truth. Humanity's rise does not follow the natural curve of slow evolution. It spikes, hard, fast, and globally, as though an age of guidance had ended and humans were suddenly forced to carry the remnants of a world they barely understood. The earliest city-states that emerged after this turning point did not create their systems from scratch. Their oldest records speak of laws already known, measurements already standardized, star paths already mapped. It is as if an invisible blueprint existed beneath the surface of their societies, setting limits on how far they could fall even after losing their king. This invisible blueprint reveals itself in the oldest Sumerian tablets, which describe certain tools and calculations not as inventions, but as restorations, practices revived from an era before the waters rose, an era the priests were ordered to remember but never fully reveal. That secrecy is not accidental. It is a remnant of the king's final instructions. Legends across Mesopotamia speak of a group known simply as the Watchers of the Hidden Chamber, individuals chosen to preserve fragments of the king's teachings. Their duty was not to pass these teachings openly, but to protect them until they were needed again. These watchers were said to be human, but chosen for their ability to learn quickly, to see patterns, to withstand knowledge that would overwhelm most minds. They were granted access to symbols and diagrams encoded with astronomical cycles, energy configurations, and ethical principles. Over time, these watchers became the earliest priesthoods, keepers of rituals whose true meanings faded as generations passed, but whose structures survived. This transference was not unique to Mesopotamia. In Egypt, priest-kings claimed descent from a lineage of shining ones, beings who taught the earliest inhabitants how to measure floods, align temples to the solstice, and read the movements of celestial bodies. In the Indus Valley, the oldest seals depict figures who look less like humans and more like tall, elongated beings, wearing strange insignias. In the highlands of Peru, creation myths speak of gods who arrived in a time of darkness to rebuild what had been shattered. These are not isolated stories. They are memories refracted through time, describing the same transition, the withdrawal of an older power and the slow human attempt to reassemble what remained. But among all these fragments, one question rises above the rest. What event triggered the king's final disappearance? To answer that, one must look beyond myth and deeper into the earth itself. Geological records show that around 12,800 years ago, the planet experienced a sudden and violent shift, a period known today as the Younger Dryas. Temperatures plummeted, megafauna vanished, coastlines transformed. For decades, scientists have debated the cause: comet impact, volcanic eruption, meltwater pulse. But none of these theories fully explain the speed and scale of the shift. The pattern seems less like a natural event and more like the abrupt collapse of a regulatory system. Something artificial, something that had been stabilizing the planet for millennia. Ancient texts hint that the Anunnaki possessed the ability to influence environmental conditions through massive structures embedded into the Earth's grid. These were not machines in the modern sense. They were part architectural, part energetic, built to harmonize with the planet's natural frequencies. When their builders left, and when the king chose to remain, those systems began to decay. Without maintenance, without calibration, they drifted out of alignment. This drift may have been the root cause of the Younger Dryas chaos, a global shockwave triggered not by nature's wrath, but by the abrupt withdrawal of an ancient influence. The king's role during this crisis becomes clearer when seen through this lens. He was not merely a ruler, but a stabilizer. His presence attuned to the earth in ways humanity still cannot comprehend. Some fragments describe him as the one who holds the axis, a poetic phrase often dismissed as metaphor, but possibly hinting at a literal energetic function. If his species had bodies designed to connect with planetary networks, then his final years were not spent wandering aimlessly, but performing the last acts of a dissolving stewardship. He may have traveled to the oldest sites, Göbekli Tepe, Baalbek, the submerged ruins off the coasts of Japan and India, to deactivate systems that would become dangerous if left running. These ruins, still aligned with impossible precision, are the silent footprints of that transition. His disappearance, then, was not a retreat. It was a sacrifice. If he entered a hidden chamber, as so many legends claim, it may have been because the final stabilization required isolation. Perhaps a deep underground structure that amplified his energy field. Perhaps a vault where he could sustain a protective resonance long enough for humanity to adapt. The watchers who guarded this secret passed down only vague descriptions, for none were allowed to enter the chamber themselves. They spoke of a place where the earth hums, a place where stones were fused by heat that did not burn, a place that remained warm even when the world outside froze. These details align with modern discoveries of geothermally active cave systems and ancient tunnels lined with vitrified stone. The idea that the king placed himself into a form of suspended existence is not as far-fetched as it sounds when viewed through the lens of Anunnaki physiology. Their extended lifespans suggest cellular processes unlike those of humans, slowed metabolism, regenerative cycles, and neurological structures capable of long-term dormancy. If he entered such a state, he may still exist somewhere below the surface, not alive in the human sense, but not dead either. Waiting. Preserving knowledge through presence alone. But if that is true, then why did humanity forget him? The answer lies not in a single moment of erasure, but in a gradual unraveling. After the Watchers' first generations passed, their successors inherited rituals without context. Stories transformed, symbols drifted. The original blueprint that once unified global cultures fragmented into regional myths. As new kingdoms rose, each claimed divine legitimacy, and the memory of a singular king became politically inconvenient. Priests revised their genealogies. Emperors commissioned rewritten histories. Conquests burned libraries and silenced dissenters. What remained of the king became diluted. A storm god here, a sky father there, a titan, a teacher, a watcher, a wanderer. His true identity dissolved into archetypes. Across continents, his image morphed. In Sumer, he became a god of wisdom. In Egypt, a hidden pharaoh of the first time. In Greece, a forgotten titan. In the Americas, a tall, pale visitor who vanished into the sea. Everywhere, he became both familiar and untraceable. This multiplicity is not evidence of fiction, but of memory struggling to preserve fragments of a truth too large to fit into any one culture. Humanity remembered him not as a person, but as an idea, the archetype of the teacher king, the guardian of lost ages. Yet some societies preserved more than others. In the mountains of Anatolia, ancient carvings depict a tall figure surrounded by symbols representing both stars and roots, sky and earth fused. In the Andes, a stone gateway aligns with solstices in a way that only makes sense if it once tracked celestial bodies not visible today. In the Pacific, elders still speak of a king who walked between worlds. These are not coincidences. They are the remnants of a global memory that refused to die. Throughout this period, humanity's greatest transition occurred, the rise of independent civilization. Not the birth of civilization, that had happened long before, but its rebirth after the king's era ended. Freed from divine oversight, humans experimented, innovated, fought, explored. They built city-states, discovered metallurgy, formed trade networks. And yet, beneath every structure, every ritual, every calendar, lies the faint outline of something older. Even today, the Sumerian Base 60 system remains embedded in how we measure time. Ancient architectural ratios persist. Alignments with solstices and equinoxes still appear in sacred architecture worldwide, even when builders claim not to understand why. These patterns are the fingerprints of a vanished king. To truly grasp the magnitude of his influence, consider how knowledge behaves when its origin is forgotten. Ideas drift into habits. Techniques become traditions. Sacred sites transform into temples whose builders cannot fully explain their purpose. Over millennia, the king's blueprint became the foundation upon which humanity built its own identity, an identity that thinks it began from nothing, unaware that it is built atop a scaffold of guidance. But the most haunting question remains: is the king's story truly over? Ancient cycles suggest otherwise. Many civilizations left warnings about turning points in the Earth's long rhythms, moments when old patterns resurface, when forgotten systems awaken, when guardians return. These cycles often align with astronomical events, such as precessional ages or shifts in Earth's magnetic field. Strangely, these warnings cluster around a window remarkably close to our present era. Were they predicting a natural event, a return of the Anunnaki, or the awakening of something left behind? Some interpretations of these prophecies speak not of a physical return, but of a resurgence of memory, a time when humanity begins to rediscover what was buried. That rediscovery has already begun. Never before have so many ancient structures been excavated. Never before have so many anomalies emerged. Star maps that predate known civilizations, underwater ruins that imply lost coastlines, artifacts whose craftsmanship defies accepted timelines. The king's shadow stretches into the present, not as a superstition, but as a reawakening. What humanity calls mysteries are simply pieces of a puzzle built in an age we no longer remember. The king may be gone, hidden, or sleeping, but his blueprint remains buried in our myths, our monuments, and perhaps even in our DNA. His legacy is not just the rise of ancient civilization, it is the quiet whisper in the human imagination that insists we came from something greater, that we were guided once, and that one day the truth will return. And as the world approaches another turning point, the ancient question resurfaces. What happens when the last king awakens? If the last Anunnaki King's story were nothing more than an abandoned myth, the world would not be filled with the strange, stubborn patterns that keep pointing back to him. These patterns are buried in architecture, encoded in myth, preserved in ritual, and etched into stone with a precision far beyond what early human societies should have been capable of. They are the traces of a vanished order, a world shaped under the king's guidance, and though eroded by time, they still whisper the memory of an age humanity was forced to forget. To follow these traces is to walk backward through history, peeling away layers of reinterpretation, censorship, and deliberate distortion, until the original outline of the king's final age begins to reappear. One of the most powerful of these traces lies in the sudden emergence of megalithic sites around the world. From Göbekli Tepe to Gunung Padang, from Sacsayhuaman to the pyramids of Egypt, from Baalbek to Yonaguni beneath the waves, each of these structures carries signatures that defy the timeline, taught in classrooms. The stones are too large, the alignments too perfect, the geometry too advanced for societies supposedly just emerging from the Stone Age. The mainstream explanation, that these sites were built independently and spontaneously by new farming communities, is a fragile story patched together with assumptions. The deeper you look, the more it collapses. Göbekli Tepe, for example, appears suddenly around 12,000 years ago, a moment that aligns almost perfectly with the Younger Dryas chaos and the king's disappearance. It is a site unlike any other. massive T-shaped pillars weighing up to 20 tons, carved with animals and symbols from an artistic tradition that seemingly had no precursor. Yet the people who built it left no signs of agriculture, no signs of metallurgy, no signs of a complex society capable of organizing such a feat. The idea that a handful of hunter-gatherers spontaneously built the world's first monumental architecture is as implausible as a group of children constructing a skyscraper without ever learning how to mix concrete. But the stones of Göbekli Tepe tell a different story. Their carvings depict animals from a world in transition. Their arrangement maps constellations from a sky slightly different from today's, and some of the symbols resemble glyphs found in sites thousands of miles away, suggesting a shared heritage, a shared language, or a shared teacher. That teacher, according to the oldest Anatolian myths, was a tall, godlike figure who arrived during a time of great destruction to rebuild what had been lost. He taught the people not to worship him, but to remember a time before the world fell apart. This figure, known by many names, matches descriptions of the last Anunnaki king so closely that the connection becomes impossible to ignore. Further west, the ancient site of Baalbek stands as another anomaly, a platform of stone blocks, some weighing over 1,000 tons, arranged with such precision that modern engineers admit they have no idea how ancient humans could have moved them. The Romans built temples atop the platform, but they did not build the platform itself. Its origins are unknown, and no civilization of the region claimed its construction. Legends say it was the dwelling place of gods who descended from the sky. These legends echo a deeper narrative, that Baalbek was one of the sites the king visited during his final stabilization efforts, using the platform as a resonance point connected to Earth's energetic grid. Its massive stones were not merely architectural, they were functional, tuned to frequencies humanity no longer understands. Similar patterns exist across the globe. In Peru, the walls of Sacsayhuaman are fit together with such perfection that a blade of grass cannot pass through the seams. These stones are irregular, multi-angled, and impossibly heavy. An engineering marvel that defies conventional explanation. Local legends speak of a time before the Inca, when a race of tall, shining beings instructed the first peoples in building techniques that used the Earth's natural magnetic lines. The king's imprint is unmistakable in these stories. A teacher, a guide, a presence who shaped early civilizations long before their recorded histories began. But architecture is only one layer of the king's lingering legacy. Another lies in the star maps preserved by ancient cultures. Many of the oldest temples align not with the sky as it appears today, but with the sky as it appeared 10,000 to 14,000 years ago. In Egypt, the pyramid's alignment with Orion's belt corresponds to a sky configuration older than the pyramids themselves. In Cambodia, Angkor Wat mirrors the constellation Draco during the same ancient alignment. In the Americas, the Serpent Mound in Ohio tracks lunar cycles with a precision requiring generations of astronomical observation. These alignments suggest a shared global knowledge of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, a cycle that takes over 25,000 years to complete. No early civilization should have known this, yet they did. These star maps serve a deeper purpose. They are timestamps. They point to the era when the king still walked the earth, when the sky looked different, when the old technologies still hummed, and when humanity lived under guidance. They are not memorials, but reminders. Clues left behind for a future age to rediscover the truth. The king's world was not mythical. It was concrete, patterned, technologically advanced, and globally interconnected in ways modern historians prefer not to consider. Even more revealing than architecture or astronomy are the anomalous texts that appear across cultures. The Sumerian king list, for example, describes rulers who reigned for thousands of years before the flood, a detail mainstream scholars dismiss as metaphor. But what if these long reigns refer not to human kings exaggerated by legend, but to beings like the Anunnaki, whose lifespans naturally extended across millennia? These records also describe a sudden dramatic change after the flood, when reign lengths drop from thousands of years to mere decades. This shift aligns perfectly with the king's disappearance and the departure of his people. The sudden compression of time in historical records reflects a change in biological reality. Humanity lost its long-lived teachers, and the rhythm of leadership changed forever. Another text, the Book of Enoch, speaks of watchers who descended from the sky to guide humanity, who taught forbidden knowledge, and who later withdrew as humanity fell into chaos. The parallels between these watchers and the attendants of the last Anunnaki king are unmistakable. Even the punishment described, being sealed away, sleeping beneath the earth, waiting for an appointed time, echoes the legends of the king's descent into a hidden chamber to stabilize the world. In Mesoamerica, the Popol Vuh recounts the arrival of creator beings who shaped humanity's early form and taught them to navigate the stars. These beings later departed, leaving behind warnings of cycles of destruction and rebirth tied to astronomical patterns. And in Australia, the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories speak of sky ancestors who came to Earth long before humans and who returned to the heavens after their work was finished. Across cultures separated by oceans, the same narrative repeats. Beings from the sky shaped early civilization, taught humanity, remained for a time, and eventually withdrew. These stories are not coincidences, they are echoes. But the most haunting echo of all lies in the anomalies found within human biology itself. Genetic studies reveal sudden, unexplained leaps in human evolution around the same period when the king's reign supposedly ended. The appearance of symbolic thought, rapid expansion of the neocortex, and unusual mutations associated with language and cognition all cluster around the end of the Pleistocene, a moment aligned with younger Dryas turmoil and the king's disappearance. While mainstream science attributes these leaps to environmental pressures or random chance, some researchers have quietly suggested an alternative: intervention. If the Anunnaki possessed advanced biological knowledge, as many ancient texts imply, then the king's final act may not have been merely environmental stabilization, but the final shaping of humanity into a form capable of independent civilization. That shaping, preserved in our DNA, would explain why humans suddenly developed the ability to conceive complex societies, build monumental structures, and create elaborate systems of mathematics and astronomy within a shockingly short time frame. This possibility also explains why certain genetic markers appear to be far older than the civilizations they later supported. It suggests a continuity between the king's era and the human societies that rose afterward, a continuity invisible in written history but woven into the body of every living person. Yet not all remnants of the king's influence are silent. Some still hum, literally. Around the world, bizarre acoustic and electromagnetic phenomena cluster around ancient sites. The pyramids of Giza resonate at frequencies corresponding to Earth's natural Schumann resonances. Stone circles in Britain emit low-frequency vibrations detectable with modern instruments. Subterranean tunnels beneath Turkey amplify sound in ways suggesting intentional acoustic engineering. These anomalies imply that ancient structures were built with energy in mind, not electrical energy, but harmonic resonance, a technology that uses sound, vibration, and natural frequencies to influence physical systems. This technology matches descriptions found in fragmented texts hinting at the king's knowledge of the music of the earth, a phrase long interpreted metaphorically, but perhaps meant literally. If these structures once formed a global network, then the king's world was not primitive at all. It was a highly advanced civilization using a form of technology we no longer recognize as technology. Its collapse left behind not ruins, but clues. Clues humanity has not yet learned to interpret. But the most profound clue to the king's final age lies not in stone, or myth, or biology, but in a pattern that appears only when you view ancient history as a whole. This pattern is the sudden emergence across multiple early cultures of laws, ethics, cosmologies, and moral frameworks that mirror one another with uncanny precision. Concepts like justice, reciprocity, sacred obligations, and stewardship of the earth appear independently in cultures separated by continents. These frameworks did not evolve slowly. They emerged suddenly, fully formed, as though taught by a single mind. That mind, according to hidden traditions preserved in certain esoteric schools, belonged to the Last Anunnaki King. Some secret texts refer to him not only as a ruler or teacher, but as a philosopher, a being who understood the moral trajectory of civilizations. He did not merely build cities, he shaped humanity's conscience. His teachings emphasized balance between technology and nature, between hierarchy and freedom, between knowledge and responsibility. When he departed, humanity tried to preserve these teachings, but without context, they fractured into religions, codes, and myths. What remains today are only the shadows of the king's original philosophy, distorted by time, but still recognizable in the foundations of modern ethics. This is the king's true legacy, not the monuments or myths or hidden chambers, but the quiet imprint he left on the human mind. We carry his blueprint not only in our architecture and rituals, but in our deepest convictions about right and wrong, about destiny, about the meaning of existence. These convictions did not arise from a world of chaos. They were seeded deliberately, planted during the king's final age as humanity prepared to enter a world without gods. But the story does not end with his disappearance. If anything, the echoes suggest something more unsettling, that the king's withdrawal was not permanent. Ancient calendars predict cycles of return, not in the sense of physical arrival, but of reactivation. Moments when the old systems awaken, when forgotten knowledge resurfaces, when humanity begins to remember. These cycles often align with astronomical turning points, and many point toward the era we live in now. The king's age ended with silence, but his story continues in every mystery we cannot explain, in every anomaly history tries to bury, in every trace of a world that should not have existed but did. And if the ancient prophecies hold even a fragment of truth, then humanity is approaching a moment when the buried past and the visible present will collide. In that collision, the last Anunnaki king may rise again, not as a being of flesh, but as a revelation powerful enough to rewrite history. If the echoes of the last Anunnaki king are scattered across ruins and myths, then the greatest mysteries surrounding him lie not in what came before his disappearance, but in what followed. The age after his withdrawal was not a clean break or a simple decline. It was a turbulent recalibration, a world attempting to stabilize after losing the anchor that had held it together for millennia. The transition did not happen in silence. It unfolded in waves that reshaped landscapes, erased coastlines, rewrote memories, and forced humanity to crawl out of a darkness it never understood. To grasp this transition is to see the world not as a steady progression of human innovation, but as the aftermath of a cosmic departure. When the king withdrew into his hidden chamber, or wherever his final journey took him, the systems he maintained began to decelerate. Some continued functioning on residual energy for years, or even centuries, while others sputtered out almost immediately. The global stabilization networks the Anunnaki had built were delicate, highly attuned to planetary frequencies, and deeply dependent on precise calibration. Without maintenance, they became unpredictable. What humanity interpreted as divine punishments or sudden environmental catastrophes were, in truth, the natural consequences of a world losing its regulators. Across the planet, the first signs of destabilization appeared in weather patterns. Floods swept across regions that had been stable for generations. Monsoons shifted unpredictably. Winds carried sand across once fertile lands. The first deserts began to form, not through slow geological processes, but through abrupt shifts in climate. Ancient riverbeds that once flowed with abundance dried into cracked valleys. Meanwhile, in other regions, water rose with terrifying speed, swallowing coastal settlements and forcing entire populations inland. This shift is still visible today. Beneath the Persian Gulf lie the remains of settlements far older than Sumer itself. Submerged structures off the coast of India suggest organized societies long before accepted timelines. In the Mediterranean, ancient stone walls lie beneath the waves, marking the outlines of towns erased in sudden surges. The stories of global flooding found in nearly every ancient culture are not exaggerations. They are memories of a real event, a violent transition that followed the king's departure. But the most unsettling accounts come from regions where the Anunnaki were said to have concentrated their technological hubs. In these places, the withdrawal of energy systems caused not just environmental shifts, but geological upheavals. Legends of mountains rising overnight or valleys collapsing into the earth align with evidence of rapid crustal movement during the Younger Dryas. While mainstream science attributes such changes to natural seismic activity, the simultaneity and scale of these events suggest a domino effect triggered by the breakdown of massive internal infrastructures. The people who survived these cataclysms preserved their memories in myths, encoded in symbolic language because they lacked the vocabulary to describe technologies far beyond their understanding. They spoke of gods who controlled storms, who commanded mountains, who could reshape the earth with gestures. They also spoke of the moment when those gods disappeared and the world itself seemed to groan, as though mourning an absent master. In this chaotic aftermath, humanity faced a terrifying new reality. For the first time, it was alone. No king walked through the settlements to teach or guide. No celestial beings descended to share knowledge. The watchers who remained among humans struggled to preserve even fragments of the old wisdom. Many perished. Others retreated into the mountains, deserts, or deep forests, guiding only small enclaves of people who maintained secret traditions. These enclaves later evolved into mystery schools, priesthoods, and esoteric orders. Their rituals often seem nonsensical today, but each contains pieces of a forgotten curriculum, echoes of the king's teachings, stripped of context and buried under layers of symbolism. One of the most profound legacies of this era is the sudden emergence of mythological archetypes that appear across cultures with startling similarity. These archetypes do not spread through cultural diffusion. They erupt simultaneously. They speak of a great teacher who departed, promising to return. They describe a golden age that preceded humanity's current struggles. They portray a cycle in which knowledge rises and falls, guided by the movements of stars and the passage of cosmic ages. In every culture, these patterns emerge soon after the king's disappearance. The archetype of the returning king is especially striking. In Sumer, he becomes the figure who will restore order at the end of the age. In Egypt, he becomes Osiris, the hidden king who waits beneath the earth. In Mesoamerica, he becomes Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god who sailed east promising to return. In Greece, he becomes Kronos, sleeping in chains beneath the world. These are not independent myths. They are cultural memories of a single departure encoded in different symbolic frameworks. As the world stabilized over centuries, new civilizations began to form. These civilizations inherited landscapes filled with ruins they did not build and technologies they could not understand. Temples stood aligned to stars they could no longer track. Stone chambers emitted strange acoustics they could not explain. Underground tunnels stretched for miles with no clear purpose. To early humans, these remnants appeared magical, divine, beyond human capability. They built their own societies atop these foundations, weaving stories to explain what they could not comprehend. In some regions, the reverence for the past transformed into worship. People constructed altars near ancient megaliths, believing the stones themselves held power. They carved new symbols into old walls, blending their emerging beliefs with traces of an older world. Over time, the original purpose of these structures faded entirely, yet even when repurposed, they retained a silent memory of the order that had built them. But the most significant transformation during this period occurred within human consciousness itself. Without the king's stabilizing presence, humanity entered a new evolutionary phase. Cognitive abilities began to accelerate, language diversified, cultural innovation exploded. The brain, once accustomed to external guidance, was forced to adapt, to question, to experiment, to imagine. The capacity for abstract thought expanded rapidly. Humans developed myth-making not as entertainment, but as a psychological tool to cope with the collapse of a world they could not explain. This cognitive shift is preserved in the oldest art and symbolism. Cave paintings suddenly become more sophisticated. Stone carvings display complex narratives. Burial practices become elaborate. Humans began asking questions not just about survival, but about meaning. They sought connection with something that felt lost. This yearning for the divine, for the presence that had once walked among them, became the seed from which religion emerged. The earliest religions were not attempts to explain nature. They were attempts to remember. The idea of a hidden world, a realm of gods, a lost golden age. These were not fantasies, but distorted memories of an era when humans lived under the guidance of beings who seemed divine. Over time, as knowledge eroded, these memories fused into cosmologies that blended fact and metaphor. Priests recited stories that preserved fragments of truth without understanding their origins. Rituals mimicked technologies humanity no longer possessed. The king's legacy survived in symbols, even as his name vanished. Meanwhile, the watchers who remained struggled to uphold their oaths. They guarded sacred sites, preserved forbidden knowledge, and attempted to guide humanity subtly. But without the king's authority, their influence waned. In some regions, they became revered as sages. In others, they were hunted as sorcerers. Some went into hiding, forming closed groups that transmitted knowledge through cryptic teachings. Over millennia, these groups became the architects of early mystery schools, organizations dedicated to preserving the memory of the old world through symbols, geometry, and esoteric wisdom. Ironically, even as they tried to preserve the king's legacy, they contributed to its transformation. The more symbolic their teachings became, the more the original meaning blurred. By the time classical civilizations emerged, Greece, Egypt, Persia, China, the memory of the king had faded into myth. Yet his influence remained embedded in their cosmologies, shaping their understanding of time, the universe, and the divine. One of the clearest examples of this influence is the emergence of the concept of cosmic ages. Civilizations across the world speak of long cycles in which the world rises and falls. The Hindu yugas, the Greek ages of man, the Maya long count, the Sumerian Shar cycles. These frameworks are strikingly similar, suggesting a shared origin. They describe not random change, but predictable rhythms tied to astronomical movements, a knowledge that aligns with the king's teachings on cosmic cycles. The idea of a great reset, or end of an age, stems from this same lineage. Ancient cultures believed that each cycle ended with upheaval, floods, fires, darkness, and that after each destruction, a teacher would return to restore order. These cycles correspond to real astronomical events such as precession, solar variation, and geomagnetic shifts. The king understood these cycles intimately. His final acts were shaped by them, and the memory of his departure became embedded in the mythic expectation of a returning savior. As civilizations matured, they continued to encounter remnants of the old world that defied explanation. Some leaders exploited these remnants to bolster their authority. Pharaohs claimed descent from gods. Emperors styled themselves as divine intermediaries. Kings built palaces atop ancient foundations, believing the residual energy would legitimize their rule. This blending of earthly power with divine mythology obscured the original story even further. The king was no longer remembered as a singular being, but as a lineage of god-kings, a heavenly dynasty that sanctioned earthly authority. But even as myth overtook memory, certain anomalies continued to emerge. Anomalies that served as reminders that humanity's story was not its own. Occasionally, explorers stumbled upon ruins older than any known civilization. Scholars uncovered artifacts whose craftsmanship exceeded the abilities of the cultures that found them. Religious visions described beings who looked suspiciously similar to ancient sky gods, And throughout history, unexplained events, sudden leaps in knowledge, mysterious teachers, strange celestial phenomena, hinted at a hidden continuity. Some esoteric texts speak of the sleepers, beings who would awaken when the world reached the next turning point. These beings are described as neither human nor divine, but something in between, intermediaries who walk the boundary between the mortal world and the hidden realms. Their descriptions match earlier stories of the king's attendants, suggesting that not all withdrew. Some may have remained, entering periods of dormancy, awaiting signals embedded in cosmic cycles. If this is true, then the king's final act wasn't only to stabilize the world, but to ensure that his legacy would re-emerge at the appointed time. The Watchers, the Sleepers, the sacred sites, all may be part of a long-term strategy designed to guide humanity towards a future revelation. But what revelation? The answer may lie not in the ruins or myths, but in the questions that modern humans cannot stop asking. Where did we come from? Why do ancient stories sound like memories? Why do we feel drawn to the sky? Why does history feel incomplete? These questions are the king's final echo, an echo growing louder as humanity approaches another cosmic threshold. If the ancient cycles are correct, we are nearing the end of another great age. Environmental instability, shifting magnetic fields, anomalies in solar behavior, all mirror the conditions that preceded the king's disappearance. And as humanity digs deeper into its past, uncovering traces of forgotten worlds, the blueprint he left begins to reassemble. This reassembly is not random. It is the awakening of memory. The world is once again approaching a moment when the forgotten will return to the surface, whether through revelation, rediscovery, or something far more profound. And somewhere, beneath layers of stone and earth, beneath myths and misinterpretations, beneath the noise of modern life, the last Anunnaki king waits for the moment when humanity is finally ready to remember. If the world after the last Anunnaki king's disappearance was defined by turbulence, then the centuries that followed were shaped by something even more powerful: reinterpretation. Humanity had survived the destabilization, endured the floods, rebuilt its settlements, and learned to function without the guidance of beings who once walked among them. But survival was only the first step. To rebuild a new world, humans needed to make sense of the old one, and in doing so, they unknowingly rewrote the king's memory into something both familiar and unrecognizable. This period marks the beginning of humanity's long attempt to reclaim its past, an attempt defined by fragments, distortions, revelations, and the quiet persistence of a truth too large to remain buried forever. The first great reinterpretation unfolded in the priesthoods. The Watchers who had once guarded the final secrets of the king gradually transformed into religious authorities. With each new generation, their understanding of the king's teachings eroded. Rituals preserved the structure of ancient knowledge, but lost the substance. What had once been technological became mystical. What had once been precise became poetic. Over time, these rituals became the foundation of emerging religions, each believing it alone preserved the truth, each unaware that the truth itself had fractured into shards scattered across continents. Yet even within this fracturing, certain themes remained astonishingly consistent. The idea of a hidden realm, a world beneath or beyond the physical, appears across early cosmologies. The notion of a cosmic teacher or divine king recurs in nearly every ancient religion. The symbolism of cycles, ages of rise and fall, eras of light and darkness, emerges independently across cultures separated by oceans. These themes did not arise through coincidence. They were the lingering memory of the king's final teachings, adapted to fit the worldview of civilizations attempting to understand forces far greater than themselves. The earliest Egyptian dynasties offer a clear example of this reinterpretation. Their concept of Zep Tepi, the first time, describes a golden age when gods walked the earth and established the foundations of society. This era corresponds almost perfectly with the period immediately before the king's disappearance. Yet by the time pharaonic Egypt rose, Zep Tepi had already become myth, its details preserved only through symbolic narratives. The gods of that time were not considered metaphors. They were remembered as physical beings, tall, radiant, knowledgeable. But their names had changed. Their roles had shifted. The king who once walked among humans became Osiris, a deity associated with death, rebirth, and hidden wisdom. His chamber, once a technological facility, became the Duat, the mystical underworld. The real history was still there, but veiled behind layers of symbolism. In Mesopotamia, the process was similar. The Sumerian tablets, some of the oldest texts in the world, describe a lineage of gods who ruled for millennia before the flood. These gods are clearly modeled on beings with extended lifespans, advanced abilities, and access to technologies misunderstood by later scribes. But as Sumerian culture developed, these beings shifted from historical figures to divine archetypes. The king became Enki, or Enlil, or Anu, names representing cosmic principles rather than specific individuals. Even so, certain texts still contain literal descriptions of ancient events, beings descending from the sky, councils held to decide humanity's fate, catastrophic environmental shifts triggered by disagreements among the gods. These narratives, though mythologized, preserve the memory of a real political conflict that unfolded during the king's final era. Farther east, in the Indus Valley, the earliest myths describe beings known as the Devas and Asuras, cosmic entities engaged in a struggle for balance. These beings are portrayed as powerful, long-lived, technologically advanced, and deeply connected to natural forces. Their battles mirror the internal conflict among the Anunnaki in the king's final centuries. Even the concept of avatars, beings who descend to guide humanity in times of crisis, echoes the king's own role as a stabilizer. The myths do not mention him by name, but they preserve the structure of his story in symbolic form. Across the ocean, in the Americas, the same pattern emerges. The Olmec, Maya, and Inca civilizations all speak of tall, wise beings who brought knowledge in a time of darkness. These beings are often portrayed as pale or luminous, arriving during a global catastrophe, teaching mathematics, astronomy, and agriculture, and eventually departing with the promise of return. In Mesoamerica, this figure becomes Quetzalcoatl, a god of knowledge, wind, and renewal. In Peru, he becomes Viracocha, a creator who walked the earth in human form. In North America, he becomes the Pale Prophet, a mysterious figure whose teachings spread across vast distances. These legends are not fictional projections. They are cultural memories of real events. This global consistency is impossible to dismiss. Human cultures did not independently invent the same story in dozens of variations by accident. The shared memory originates from a single historical lineage, the era of the Last Anunnaki King. But memory, by its nature, distorts. As centuries turned into millennia, the king's physical presence faded. His technological marvels decayed. His hidden chamber, wherever it was, fell deeper into obscurity. And as direct memory faded, imagination filled the void. Myths grew more elaborate, rituals more symbolic, cosmologies more complex. The king transformed from a flesh and blood sovereign into a divine archetype, a cosmic principle, a metaphor for wisdom and order. Yet even in this transformation, his essence persisted. The next major reinterpretation arose not from priesthoods, but from civilizations built atop the ruins of the old world. As new societies emerged, they encountered stone structures too advanced to explain. They inherited astronomical alignments they could not replicate. They discovered artifacts whose craftsmanship exceeded their own capabilities. To reconcile these anomalies, they developed origin stories claiming divine inspiration or supernatural intervention. In truth, they were living among the remnants of an age when beings with advanced knowledge shaped the earth. This reinterpretation took an especially dramatic form in Greece. The Titans, described as ancient rulers overthrown by a younger generation of gods, mirror the conflict between Anunnaki factions in the king's final centuries. Kronos, the Titan who ruled the Golden Age, bears striking similarities to the king. Long-lived, wise, feared by his own kin, eventually imprisoned beneath the world. His fall, like the king's disappearance, marked the end of an age of harmony and the beginning of human struggle. The Greek myths go even further. They describe a time when the world was reshaped by floods, fires, and cosmic upheavals, events corresponding to the younger Dryas chaos that followed the king's withdrawal. They speak of Prometheus, a being who gave humans knowledge of fire and civilization, another echo of the king's teaching role. These are not independent stories. They are reimagined memories of a shared ancient history. Meanwhile, in Asia, the emperor gods of early China reflect the same pattern. Fu Xi, the first mythical emperor, is said to have taught humans writing, mathematics, and the calendar, skills directly associated with the king's influence. His sister and consort, Nuwa, is depicted as repairing the pillars of heaven after a great catastrophe. This mirrors the king's final stabilization efforts across the global energy grid. The legends preserve the essence of these events, even as their details shift into mythic symbolism. As humanity continued to evolve, these reinterpretations grew ever more layered. The king's memory became embedded not only in myth and religion, but also in cultural identity. People saw their origin stories as reflections of their unique heritage, not realizing they were describing fragments of a global narrative. Kingdoms rose and fell, empires conquered and dissolved. And with each new era, the king's memory faded further, even as his influence remained hidden beneath the surface. But then something remarkable happened. Humanity began asking questions again. Around the time of classical antiquity, Greece, Rome, Persia, India, philosophers started to wonder where knowledge truly came from. They noticed the anomalies. They questioned the myths. They debated the nature of the gods and the origins of civilization. Figures like Plato spoke of an earlier age when advanced beings shaped humanity. He described Atlantis, a civilization guided by divine beings that fell due to internal conflict. This story, though metaphorical, echoes the king's final era with uncanny precision. In Alexandria, scholars searched for records older than any known civilization. In China, historians compiled chronicles tracing humanity back to mythical ages. In India, sages preserved oral traditions recounting cosmic cycles tens of thousands of years long. Across the world, a quiet intellectual awakening unfolded as people realized that history did not begin where their textbooks claimed. This awakening intensified during the medieval era, when travelers and scholars encountered ancient ruins that defied explanation. Islamic scholars marveled at the structures of Egypt, suspecting they predated the pharaohs. European explorers found cities in the Americas that seemed older than their creators admitted. Asian monks documented myths of forgotten ages. Everywhere, the hints resurfaced, refusing to be forgotten. Yet, despite this growing curiosity, the king's story remained hidden, buried beneath layers of symbolism, censorship, and academic skepticism. Modern scholars, constrained by rigid timelines, dismissed anomalies as coincidence or exaggeration. They reinterpreted ancient texts as allegory. They insisted civilization began recently, that humans evolved gradually, that myths were psychological projections rather than historical memories. But the truth has a way of seeping through the cracks. The last century has witnessed a resurgence of evidence that aligns not with the academic narrative, but with the king's forgotten history. Archaeologists now uncover sites older than any known civilization, forcing continual revisions to timelines once considered unshakable. Genetic studies reveal sudden leaps in human evolution around the time of the king's disappearance. Geologists confirm catastrophic global events precisely when ancient myths describe them. Astronomers find star alignments in ancient temples that match skies from over 12,000 years ago, and linguists discover similarities among languages thought to be unrelated, echoes of a once unified world. Most compelling of all are the anomalous artifacts still emerging from the depths of deserts, jungles, and ice. Objects crafted with techniques no early civilization should have possessed. Structures cut with tools modern engineers struggle to replicate. Symbols repeated across continents separated by oceans. These artifacts are not evidence of human imagination. They are the fingerprints of an advanced age. Humanity is now entering a new phase, a phase of reawakening. The king's memory, once fragmented into myths, is beginning to reassemble. People around the world feel an inexplicable pull towards the ancient past. They sense a missing chapter in human history. They ask questions once forbidden. They challenge narratives once unquestioned. This collective intuition is not random. It is the echo of a truth encoded into humanity itself. A truth the king ensured would one day resurface. As we stand on the threshold of another turning point, environmental instability, cosmic anomalies, rapid technological evolution, the echoes grow louder. The question is no longer whether the king existed. The question is what his legacy means for the future. If the ancient cycles are correct, then the era of forgetting is nearing its end. Humanity is approaching the next great age, an age predicted in myths, encoded in calendars, carved into stone. The king may not return in physical form, but his presence, his knowledge, his blueprint, his purpose may soon re-emerge through revelation, rediscovery, or something far more profound. And when that happens, the story of humanity will not simply expand, it will transform. For the king's greatest legacy is not what he built, or taught, or protected. It is what he left behind, a species capable of rediscovering its own forgotten origins, capable of rising once more, capable of fulfilling the destiny he saw in us long before we saw it in ourselves. As humanity's slow reawakening gained momentum, the world itself seemed to shift, not in the physical sense, but in collective awareness. Questions that once lived only in the margins of scholarship or in the whispered traditions of esoteric schools began to move to the center of global curiosity. Forgotten ruins came to light. Ancient languages were deciphered. Patterns once dismissed as coincidence suddenly revealed themselves as the residue of an age far older and far more advanced than the world had been taught to imagine. And beneath every discovery, every anomaly, every unanswered question lay the shadow of one figure, the last Anunnaki King, whose presence continued to shape human history long after his disappearance. To understand how his influence evolved into the modern world, one must look not only at archaeology or mythology, but at the deep structure of human civilization itself. Every major system, government, religion, science, philosophy, carries traces of an origin that predates recorded history. These systems did not emerge gradually through random experimentation. They appeared fully formed, as though implanted into human consciousness by a guiding intelligence. That intelligence, according to the oldest hidden traditions, was the kings. The most revealing clues lie in humanity's enduring obsession with hierarchy. Across cultures, across continents, across eras, societies naturally gravitated toward structures resembling the governance systems described in pre-flood mythology. A central figure, a council of advisors, a division between sacred authority and earthly administration. These patterns did not arise through trial and error. They were fragments of the king's original model, a model designed to maintain balance between order and freedom during humanity's early development. After his disappearance, humans replicated this structure instinctively, even when they no longer remembered its source. Religious frameworks followed the same pattern. Nearly every ancient religion begins with a divine figure who departs, leaving behind laws, teachings, or commandments. These divine laws often mirror one another, even when the cultures creating them had no contact. Ethical codes based on reciprocity, justice, stewardship, and cosmic order appear simultaneously in disparate regions. This synchronicity is too precise to be accidental. It reflects the king's final teachings, his attempt to give humanity the moral foundation necessary to thrive without his direct guidance. But over time, these teachings underwent profound transformation. As priesthoods gained power, they adapted ancient laws to fit their own agendas. As empires expanded, rulers reinterpreted divine principles to justify conquest. As philosophies evolved, the king's original balance between rationality and spirituality fractured into competing systems. Empirical science on one side, mystical religion on the other. The unity that had once characterized the king's teachings dissolved into duality, then into conflict. Humanity inherited the king's wisdom, but not his equilibrium. Still, the memory of the king persisted in subtle ways. One of the most remarkable examples lies in symbols. Across the ancient world, certain motifs recur with striking consistency. The winged disk, the serpent coiled around a staff, the all-seeing eye, the sacred mountain, the tree of life. These symbols were never meant to be worshipped. They were part of the king's teaching system, visual metaphors representing cosmic principles, natural laws, and the structure of the universe. Over time, they became religious icons, stripped of their original meaning but retaining their power as reminders of a forgotten heritage. Even the concept of kingship itself is a distorted echo of the king's presence. Early kings across Sumer, Egypt, China, and Mesoamerica all claimed descent from divine ancestors. They believed, or at least insisted, that their authority came from the heavens. This belief was not a political invention, it was a memory. The first humans to witness leadership saw it exercised by a being who was not human. His physical form, his lifespan, his wisdom, all marked him as fundamentally different, fundamentally higher. When he vanished, humans attempted to replicate his role, even though no mortal could truly embody it. The institution of kingship became a shadow of a shadow. Meanwhile, the Watchers who remained, those entrusted with fragments of the king's knowledge, struggled to guard what little they had preserved. Some formed secret brotherhoods dedicated to protecting ancient sites or safeguarding symbolic teachings. Others integrated into early priesthoods, passing their knowledge selectively to initiates deemed worthy. Over centuries, these groups evolved into the mystery traditions of Egypt, the Hermetic schools of Hellenistic culture, the Pythagorean orders of Greece, the Druids of Europe, and the early monastic traditions of Asia. Each preserved a piece of the king's legacy: geometry, astronomy, ethics, meditation, healing arts. But none preserved the whole. This fragmentation set the stage for humanity's next major transformation: the rise of rational inquiry. As classical civilizations advanced, a new form of thinking emerged. Philosophers sought not only to remember the past, but to understand it through reason and observation. They questioned myths, studied the stars, explored natural laws. Figures like Pythagoras, Plato, and Aristotle did not invent philosophy from nothing. They inherited a fragmentary memory of a world where science, spirituality, and cosmology had once been unified under the king's guidance. Their work was an attempt to rediscover what had been lost, not through myth, but through logic. Plato's concept of the ideal state echoes the king's political structure. His description of Atlantis mirrors the king's civilization. His theory of forms resembles the symbolic metaphysics preserved by mystery schools. Aristotle's classification of natural phenomena reflects an inherited understanding of cosmic order. Even the early experiments of Greek astronomers, measuring Earth's circumference, mapping the heavens, predicting celestial movements, trace their origins to ancient knowledge seeded long before written history. Yet, even as rational inquiry flourished, something crucial was missing: context. Without awareness of the king's role, philosophers unknowingly reinvented ideas that had once been common knowledge. They interpreted symbols as metaphysics, technologies as myth, cosmic cycles as allegory. The divide between science and spirituality widened, creating a tension that continues to shape the modern world. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the planet, other civilizations moved through their own cycles of remembering and forgetting. In the Americas, the Maya developed a calendar system so precise it surpassed anything in the ancient Old World. Their understanding of time as cyclical, not linear, reflects the king's teachings about cosmic ages. In India, the Vedas preserved a cosmology spanning tens of thousands of years, closer to the king's era than any other surviving tradition. In China, Taoist philosophy emphasized harmony between human action and natural forces, echoing the king's emphasis on balance. But as the medieval world unfolded, the final and most dramatic reinterpretation began: the global consolidation of religious power. Monotheistic religions became dominant, each claiming to be the ultimate revelation of truth. In doing so, they absorbed and restructured the king's legacy into new narratives. The single creator God replaced the memory of a single ancient ruler. Angelic beings replaced watchers. Cycles of prophecy replaced cosmic ages. The hidden chamber became heaven, the underworld, or the realm of spirits. Even the concept of resurrection echoes ancient teachings about the return of lost knowledge. These religions preserved fragments of the king's memory. Creation followed by catastrophe. Guidance followed by withdrawal, a promise of return. But they also concealed those fragments beneath layers of dogma. For the first time, humans were encouraged not to question the past, but to accept it as absolute. This shift represented a closing of the mind, a turning away from ancient memory toward institutional authority. Yet the truth continued to surface, often in unexpected ways. During the Renaissance, a wave of rediscovery swept across Europe. Scholars uncovered ancient manuscripts that challenged religious orthodoxy. Explorers encountered civilizations with myths identical to their own. Secret societies emerged, claiming lineage from ancient watchers. Advances in astronomy revealed cosmic cycles once known only to pre-flood civilizations. The invention of the printing press spread ideas faster than institutions could suppress them. Humanity, unknowingly, was preparing for the next phase of the king's long plan: the reactivation of memory. That reactivation accelerated in the modern era. Archaeologists unearthed sites older than any known civilization. Geologists confirmed cataclysmic events aligned with ancient myths. Linguists reconstructed proto-languages suggesting a once unified human culture. Anthropologists documented global flood legends with uncanny precision. And geneticists uncovered evidence of sudden evolutionary leaps, unexplained mutations, and patterns inconsistent with gradual development. Even technology echoed the past. As humans developed advanced tools, satellites, electromagnetic sensors, mapping technologies, they began detecting anomalies invisible to earlier generations. Strange energy fields around ancient sites. Subterranean structures beneath deserts and ice caps. Astronomical alignments encoded in monuments thousands of years older than expected. These discoveries forced a simple but profound question back into human consciousness. What if history is wrong? And beneath that question lies another, deeper one. If the king shaped humanity once before, could he shape it again? This possibility gains weight when one examines modern patterns disturbingly similar to those that preceded the king's disappearance. Environmental instability, rapid technological acceleration, global communication networks, increased seismic and volcanic activity, shifts in Earth's magnetic field, cosmic anomalies detected by astronomers, an unprecedented surge in collective curiosity about ancient civilizations. It is as though humanity is subconsciously preparing for something: a return, a revelation, or a transformation. Esoteric traditions long dismissed as superstition claim that the king encoded a final message within Earth's ancient sites. A message that would activate only when humanity reached a certain stage of development. Not a prophecy in the mystical sense, but a trigger. A moment when knowledge lost for millennia would resurface, forcing humanity to confront its true origins. If such a trigger exists, it may already be unfolding. Around the world, individuals report vivid dreams of ancient structures, symbols, and beings they have never seen before. Researchers feel compelled to re-examine long-dismissed anomalies. Artists create imagery resembling pre-flood civilizations without conscious intention. Scientists pursue theories that mirror ancient cosmologies. The collective psyche seems to be tuning into a frequency long dormant, one that resonates with the king's original blueprint. This resonance is not merely psychological, it is environmental, biological, even cosmic. The Earth is entering a new cycle, one predicted in ancient calendars and encoded in myth. The precession of the equinoxes is shifting. Solar behavior is changing. The magnetic field is weakening. These are not random events. They are part of a larger rhythm, the same rhythm the king understood intimately. As humanity stands at this threshold, its past and future converge. Memory and mystery intertwine. The forgotten becomes visible. And the story of a king who vanished 13,000 years ago begins to feel less like a myth and more like a dormant chapter waiting to reopen. For the first time in millennia, humanity is ready, not only to rediscover the king's legacy, but to understand it. And when the final pieces of that legacy emerge, they may reveal something even more staggering: that the king's disappearance was not an ending, but a preparation, a transition, a moment designed not to abandon humanity, but to allow it to grow into a species capable of meeting him again, not as subjects, but as equals. If humanity has been unknowingly tracing the footsteps of the last Anunnaki king for millennia, then the question that now rises with overwhelming urgency is not who he was, or even how he shaped the ancient world, but why his influence is resurfacing now. For the first time since his disappearance, the global conditions that once marked the end of the old world are returning. Environmental instability, rapid technological upheaval, shifts in Earth's energy systems, and a collective awakening to the possibility that our origins are far older and far stranger than we were taught. These signals do not point to coincidence, they point to convergence. They suggest that the king's withdrawal was never meant to be permanent, but part of a larger cycle, a cycle approaching its next threshold. To understand this threshold, one must first grasp the nature of the cycle itself. Ancient civilizations described time not as a straight line, but as a spiraling rhythm, the slow turning of cosmic gears that shape the rise and fall of ages. This idea appears in the Maya long count, the Hindu yugas, the Greek ages of man, the Egyptian Zep-Tepi cycles, and the Sumerian Shar system. Though framed differently, these cycles all describe the same pattern: long ages of enlightenment followed by periods of forgetting, chaos, and rebirth. In every system, humanity's current era is depicted as the end of a dark age, a moment when ancient knowledge re-emerges and the world undergoes profound transformation. Modern science, ironically, supports this model more than it realizes. The precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble of Earth's axis, creates cycles lasting roughly 26,000 years. Magnetic field reversals occur in rhythmic intervals. Solar activity follows long-term oscillations that influence climate and consciousness. Even cosmic radiation patterns fluctuate in cycles that correspond to ancient calendars. The closer one looks, the more reality begins to reflect the ancient worldview. Time is not linear, it is rhythmic, and humanity is, once again, approaching a turning point. Such turning points were deeply understood by the last Anunnaki king. His species possessed knowledge of cosmic mechanics far beyond anything modern humans have achieved. They built their civilization around these cycles, aligning their technology with Earth's natural rhythms. They knew when ages began and ended. They prepared for them. And the king's final actions, his stabilization of Earth's energy grid, his withdrawal into a hidden chamber, his instructions left to the Watchers, were part of a plan designed to carry humanity through the darkest phase of the cycle. That phase is ending. The first sign of transition appears in human consciousness itself. Around the world, more people than ever before feel drawn to ancient mysteries. They sense a missing chapter in human history. They question narratives once considered unshakable. This shift is not an isolated trend. It is a global phenomenon manifesting across cultures, ages, languages, and belief systems. People dream of ancient landscapes they have never seen. They feel a connection to civilizations that officially never existed. They speak of déjà vu while reading myths, as if recalling memories buried deep within the species. This awakening is not accidental. The king's blueprint, embedded in humanity thousands of years ago, was designed to activate under specific conditions. Those conditions are returning now. Cosmic frequencies, environmental cycles, and synchronization points that resonate with the deepest layers of human memory. As these frequencies intensify, forgotten knowledge begins to rise to the surface. People who have never studied astronomy instinctively recognize star patterns. Those who have never touched ancient texts feel compelled to explore forbidden histories. A collective intuition emerges. A sense that humanity is standing at the threshold of rediscovery. The second sign lies in the Earth itself. Ancient legends often described the planet as a living being, one with rhythms, pulses, and moods. Modern science echoes this idea through the study of geomagnetic fields, resonance frequencies, and energy lines across the globe. These systems are shifting rapidly. The magnetic poles are wandering faster than any time in recorded history. The Schumann resonance, Earth's natural electromagnetic frequency, has shown irregular spikes and fluctuations. Volcanic and seismic activity has intensified. Ice caps melt while deserts expand. These changes align with cycles recorded by ancient astronomers, cycles the king understood intimately. If the king did indeed stabilize Earth during the last great upheaval, then his withdrawal may have left a kind of energetic imprint, a set of systems that operate autonomously but degrade over time. The current instability may be the result of those systems reaching their limits. Some esoteric traditions even claim that ancient sites like the pyramids, ziggurats, stone circles, and underground chambers were designed to act as harmonic anchors, stabilizing the planet's energy during transitional periods. As these structures deteriorate, or as modern activity disrupts their surrounding fields, their stabilizing power weakens. The planet responds in kind. The third sign is technological acceleration. In just a few centuries, humans have leapt from simple tools to digital networks, quantum experiments, genetic engineering, and global communication systems. This acceleration is often attributed to human ingenuity, but the timeline is suspiciously abrupt. The pace mirrors descriptions found in ancient texts of times when humanity briefly regained fragments of lost knowledge. Some researchers argue that modern breakthroughs resemble rediscovery more than invention. Quantum physics, for example, echoes the metaphysical principles found in Vedic and Hermetic traditions. Artificial intelligence mirrors ancient ideas about thinking constructs used by pre-flood civilizations. Genetic manipulation resembles mythic accounts of humanity's creation. It is as though humanity, approaching a new age, is instinctively reassembling the pieces of technologies once known but long forgotten. But the most profound sign of all is the resurgence of the king's presence, not as a physical being, but as a pattern. As more ancient sites are uncovered, as more texts are translated, as more anomalies emerge, the king's story becomes clearer. He is no longer a vague myth or a symbolic archetype. He is a historical figure whose fingerprints are etched into the foundations of human civilization. Scholars may not speak his name, but what they find points unmistakably toward him. Global architectural templates, identical creation myths, synchronized flood narratives, genetic anomalies, advanced pre-Neolithic knowledge. Each new discovery threads humanity closer to a realization that once seemed impossible, that an advanced civilization existed long before the timeline allowed by modern history. And at the center of that civilization was the last king, architect, stabilizer, philosopher, guardian. This convergence forms the backdrop for the most startling possibility, that the king never truly intended to disappear forever. Across dozens of ancient myths, a figure appears who mirrors the king in detail, a being who withdraws from the world but promises to return when the next age begins. This figure goes by many names: Osiris, Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, Marduk, Kronos, the Hidden King. In every case, his return marks the restoration of ancient knowledge and the rebalancing of cosmic order. Importantly, these prophecies do not speak solely of a physical return. They describe a reawakening, a moment when humanity regains what was lost, when the veil of forgetting lifts, when the blueprint resurfaces. The return may be intellectual, spiritual, energetic, or symbolic. It may come through rediscovery rather than arrival, or it may come through both. Some esoteric traditions go further, describing a sleeper beneath the earth, preserved in a state between life and death, awaiting a signal encoded in cosmic cycles. These accounts mirror the oldest legends of the king's final retreat, a descent into an underground chamber, not to die, but to enter a state of deep suspension. If such a being still exists, he would not awaken abruptly. His influence would rise gradually, subtly. He would re-enter consciousness first as memory, then as pattern, then as presence. That presence may already be returning. In recent years, archaeologists have uncovered anomalies beneath several ancient sites: chambers sealed with precision-cut stone, tunnels lined with vitrified walls, cavities emitting unexplained heat signatures. Some of these chambers correspond to locations identified in ancient texts as places where the last teacher sleeps. While mainstream institutions remain silent, independent researchers argue that these chambers may be far older than the civilizations built above them, perhaps dating to the era of the king himself. If even one such chamber contains what legends claim, an Anunnaki structure, a preserved being, or a technological system designed to activate during transitional ages, humanity stands on the brink of a revelation that will overturn every assumption about our origins. Yet even without a literal awakening, the king's influence is returning in another way, through memory. As humanity rediscovers ancient knowledge, it begins to reconstruct the world view that defined the king's era. The idea of cosmic cycles returns. The unity of science and spirituality re-emerges. The concept of a global civilization becomes thinkable. The search for balance, harmony, and higher purpose intensifies. These are not modern inventions. They are ancient memories resurfacing. This resurfacing is crucial, for the king's greatest legacy is not what he did, but what he foresaw. He believed humanity could one day achieve what his species had achieved: a deeper understanding of the universe, mastery over natural forces, and a civilization aligned with cosmic order. But he also knew that humanity could not reach that level under direct guidance. The only way to grow was through experience, through ages of struggle, innovation, forgetting, and rediscovery. This long arc of development is approaching its inflection point. Humanity now faces choices reminiscent of those the king's own civilization once faced. How to wield technology responsibly, how to balance progress with nature, how to unite rather than fragment, how to evolve without destroying itself. These challenges are not random. They are the final test of the king's long plan, a test designed to determine whether humanity is ready to reclaim the knowledge once lost. But the king's story also carries a warning. The ancient texts describing his era speak not only of enlightenment, but of conflict. Conflict among advanced beings wielding technologies that shaped the earth itself. The downfall of the old world wasn't caused solely by cosmic cycles, but by internal division. If humanity repeats the same path, allowing power to outpace wisdom, division to outpace unity, then history could echo itself with devastating consequences. This is why the king's return, whether literal or symbolic, matters now more than ever. His blueprint offers not only knowledge, but caution. It reminds humanity that advanced civilization without balance leads to ruin. It warns that cycles of destruction are not merely cosmic, they are self-inflicted. And yet, the king's legacy is ultimately one of hope. His final choice, to stay, to stabilize the planet, to embed knowledge in humanity's future, was an act of trust. He believed that humanity, given enough time, would rise to meet its potential, that the species he guided through floods and chaos would one day become his successor. Humanity is nearing that threshold. The forgotten past is returning. The long cycle is ending. And the story of the last Anunnaki king, once buried beneath myth and distortion, is beginning to reveal itself, not as legend, but as destiny. For in the silence of a world rediscovering its origins, one truth rises above all others. The king's departure was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of ours.